The candles had barely been lit when the first carriage rolled through the iron gates of Ashcombe Hall, and already the air inside the great house felt heavy, as if it knew something was about to happen. Lucy Whitmore stood near the tall windows of the drawing room, her hands folded in front of her pale blue gown, watching the lanterns flicker along the drive. She was the new Duchess of Ashcombe, though the title still felt borrowed, like a coat that did not quite fit her shoulders yet. She had been married to Edmund, the Duke, for only 4 months, and this was the first time she would host his family and friends at a formal dinner in this house. She was not nervous about the food, or the wine, or the seating arrangements. Those things had been handled with quiet efficiency by the household staff, who had grown fond of her gentle manner in a short time. What made her stomach tighten was the guest list. Tonight, for the first time since her wedding, she would sit across the table from Countess Beatrice Ashford, a woman known throughout the county for her sharp tongue and her habit of finding fault in anyone she considered beneath her. Edmund crossed the room and stood beside her, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the polished floor. He noticed the tension in her fingers and gently placed his hand over hers. "You look as though you are preparing for battle," he said, a small smile tugging at his mouth. "Perhaps I am," Lucy replied, though her voice stayed soft. "Your cousin does not think much of me, Edmund. I have heard the whispers." "My cousin does not think much of anyone who was not born wearing a title," he said. "That is her flaw, not yours. Do not let her words trouble you tonight. You belong here as much as she does. More, in fact, since this is your home now." Lucy nodded, though the knot in her chest did not fully loosen. She had grown up far from grand houses like this one. Her father had been a schoolteacher in a small town, a man who believed that knowledge was the truest form of wealth a person could carry. Lucy had spent her childhood surrounded by books rather than jewels, and while she had learned to move through noble circles with grace since her marriage, she still felt, at times, like an outsider peering through a window at a world that was not entirely hers. But there was something about her past that very few people in this house knew. Before her marriage to Edmund, Lucy had spent 3 years living and working in Paris, teaching English to the children of a wealthy French family while she herself studied their language with quiet, relentless dedication. She had walked the streets of that city with a notebook in her coat pocket, writing down phrases she heard from bakers and booksellers and old women feeding pigeons in the park. She had read novels in their original French long before she ever read them in translation. Her accent had been polished not through a tutor's careful lessons, but through years of simply listening, living, and loving the sound of the language. She had never spoken of this time to anyone at Ashcombe Hall, not even to the household staff who adored her. It was not that she was ashamed of it. Quite the opposite. It was one of the proudest periods of her life. But she had learned, early in her marriage, that revealing too much about herself too quickly in this new world often led to more questions than she wished to answer, and sometimes to judgment she had no desire to invite. So she kept it folded away, like a letter tucked inside a drawer, waiting for the right moment. Tonight, she suspected that moment might be closer than she thought. The first guests began to arrive shortly after 7. Lord and Lady Pembroke came first, followed by a cheerful older gentleman named Mr. Harold Whitfield, an old friend of the Duke's late father, who greeted Lucy with genuine warmth and complimented the fresh flowers arranged along the entrance hall. Lucy relaxed slightly with each friendly face that passed through the doors, her shoulders easing, her smile becoming less practiced and more real. Then, just as the clock struck 7:30, the doors opened once more, and Countess Beatrice Ashford swept into the hall as though she owned every stone of it. She was a striking woman, tall and elegant, with silver-streaked hair pinned into an elaborate style, and a gown of deep emerald silk that caught the candlelight beautifully. Her eyes, sharp and pale, moved across the room in a single sweeping glance, taking in every detail, every face, every flaw. When her gaze landed on Lucy, something flickered behind them, something like amusement mixed with disdain. "Duchess," the Countess said, extending 2 fingers rather than a full hand. "How charming that you have managed to arrange all of this so nicely. One would almost forget you were not raised for it." The words were delivered with a smile, wrapped in the sort of politeness that made them difficult to challenge directly, though the sting beneath them was unmistakable. A few nearby guests exchanged quick glances, unsure whether to laugh or look away. Lucy kept her expression calm and warm. "Thank you, Countess. I do hope you find the evening pleasant." "I am certain I shall find it interesting at the very least," the Countess replied, before gliding past her toward the drawing room, her silk gown whispering against the floor. Edmund, who had been speaking with Mr. Whitfield nearby, caught the exchange and moved quickly to Lucy's side. "Ignore her," he murmured. "She does this to everyone. It is simply her way of feeling important." "I am not troubled," Lucy said, and to her own surprise she found that she meant it, at least for the moment. There was something steadying about knowing exactly who she was, even if the Countess did not yet know it herself. More guests arrived over the following half-hour, filling the drawing-room with soft laughter and the gentle clink of glasses. A young couple recently married, the Harrisons, spoke animatedly with Lucy about their honeymoon travels through the countryside. An elderly aunt of Edmund's, Lady Countess, told a long and winding story about a garden party gone wrong that had the whole circle around her laughing by its end. For a while, Lucy nearly forgot about the Countess entirely, caught up instead in the warmth of good company and easy conversation. But Beatrice had a way of making her presence known, even from across a room. She drifted from group to group, offering compliments that felt more like judgments and observations that felt more like corrections. Lucy noticed how people seemed to straighten their posture when the Countess approached, how conversations grew slightly more careful, slightly more guarded. At last, the butler appeared in the doorway and announced that dinner was ready to be served. The guests began to move toward the dining hall in pairs and small groups, their voices a pleasant hum beneath the soft glow of the chandeliers. The dining hall at Ashcombe was a magnificent room, with a long table set beneath 3 enormous chandeliers, their crystal drops scattering warm light across white linen and polished silver. Portraits of past dukes and duchesses lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to watch the gathering below with quiet judgment of their own. Lucy took her seat at one end of the table beside Edmund, while the Countess was seated not far from them, close enough that her voice would carry easily across the space between courses. Lucy noticed this placement and wondered briefly whether it had been arranged deliberately, though by whom she could not say. As the first course was served, a delicate soup with a fragrant herb garnish, the conversation around the table settled into a comfortable rhythm. Mr. Whitfield told a story about a fox that had once caused chaos during a hunt. Lady Pembroke shared news of a charity event planned for the following month. Laughter rose and fell like gentle waves. Then, quite suddenly, the Countess turned her attention toward Lucy, her pale eyes gleaming with the particular brightness of someone who had been waiting for an opportunity. "Duchess," she said, her voice carrying easily across the table, "tell me, have you had the chance to travel much before your marriage? I understand your family was not one for grand journeys." The question was innocent enough on its surface, but Lucy recognized the shape of it immediately, the careful construction meant to remind everyone present of her humble beginnings. "I have traveled some," Lucy answered simply, keeping her tone light. "Though perhaps not in the manner you mean, Countess." "How modest," Beatrice said, though her smile suggested she meant something closer to how convenient. She turned briefly toward the ambassador's wife seated beside her, a refined woman named Madame Fournier who had joined the gathering as a guest of Lord Pembroke, and said something quick and quiet in French, just loud enough for those nearby to catch the sound of it, though not necessarily the meaning. A few guests smiled politely, unsure of what had been said, uncertain whether they were meant to laugh. Madame Fournier, for her part, offered only a small, tight smile in return, her eyes flickering briefly toward Lucy with something that might have been curiosity or perhaps sympathy. Lucy said nothing, simply reaching for her water glass with a steady hand. She had understood every word the Countess had spoken, a light remark about country manners lacking a certain polish, but she chose, for now, to let it pass unanswered. There would be time enough for the truth to reveal itself. She was not one to rush toward a confrontation she did not need to seek out. The soup course ended, and the servants moved quietly around the table, clearing dishes and preparing for what would come next. The candlelight flickered against the silver, and somewhere down the table, someone began telling a story about a horse race, drawing fresh laughter from the group. But Lucy noticed the way the Countess kept glancing in her direction throughout the exchange, a small, satisfied curve at the corner of her mouth, as though she had already decided how the rest of the evening would unfold. She believed, quite plainly, that she had found her target for the night, a quiet young duchess with no grand education and no reason to challenge her. Lucy allowed her to believe it a little longer. Beneath the table, Edmund's hand found hers again, a silent question in the gentle pressure of his fingers. She answered it with the smallest squeeze, a promise that she was well, that she did not need rescuing, not yet. As the next course arrived, a beautifully arranged plate of roasted game with delicate sauce, the conversation around the table shifted once more, weaving between politics, local gossip, and the upcoming autumn festival the county always held. Lucy listened carefully, contributing when she had something worth saying, staying quiet when she did not, exactly as she always had. But something inside her had shifted slightly during that first exchange, a quiet readiness settling into her chest. She thought of the narrow streets of Paris, the smell of fresh bread from the corner bakery, the sound of French conversation drifting from open windows on warm evenings. She thought of the notebook she had filled with careful handwriting, page after page, until the language no longer felt foreign to her at all, but like a second voice living inside her own. The Countess believed she had brought a lamb to the table tonight, someone soft and uncertain, easy prey for her carefully aimed remarks. She had no idea what was actually seated across from her. Lucy lifted her wine glass slightly, her expression calm and pleasant, and allowed herself the smallest private smile as the next course was served, and the evening continued to unfold around her, candlelight glowing warm against silver and crystal, voices rising and falling like a tide that had not yet reached its highest point.